8:37, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on into the gang of, well, it's typically now the gang of 4 amigos. It's going to be the gang of 5 amigos. I'll explain. But Johnny B is here. Good morning, Johnny.
Good morning, guys.
Chris Hand is here. Morning, Chris.
Hey, good morning.
Weaves.
Good morning, boys. Yeah.
The beard that barks is here as well.
The beard that barks.
Put that on a T-shirt, everybody.
I like it.
So there is a story. I actually led off with this story in the 5 o'clock hour. And it's a story about a conservative Republican poll worker in Virginia who was verbally assaulted by a spittle-spewing progressive.
You f***ing try to overthrow elections with violence, and then you're out here among decent people.
Thanks for
what
coming out
there. What do you have to say to that, huh? What are your policy?
Have a nice day. You've already
fucking
voted.
racist
Good.
rights.
Yeah.
Involving yourself in people's families and their bedrooms.
It's pretty wild.
You fucking animal. You try to steal my vote next year, I'm gonna remember you personally.
Thank you.
Yeah, one-party state. You want a one-party country.
Hey, sir, how are you? Headed in to vote? Can I get a Republican sample ballot? Sure, thank you.
There you go. Welcome to the program, Matthew Hurtt from Smyrna, Tennessee. And Matthew, I guess somehow you are that poll worker that was attacked by that progressive, and you at some point traveled from Middle Tennessee out to Virginia. So let's talk a little bit about your journey, first of all. What led you from Smyrna out to Virginia to work the polls?
Well, whoa, Dan. First of all, it's great to be on, but don't put Smyrna on me. I grew up in the Blackman community and went to Blackman High School and Middle Tennessee State University. Got a lot of friends in Smyrna, but I wouldn't claim it.
Okay, very good.
You know, I was an activist at Middle Tennessee State University, college Republican, wrote for the newspaper, had a radio show, actually was on in the studio at Super Talk 99.7 WTN a number of times in the mid-2000s with Uncle Phil and Johnny B back in the day, and you know, was a conservative activist on campus. When I graduated in the first economic downturn of my life, and a lot of my friends went to law school, and I took the LSAT, and then I got a job offer in Washington, D.C., working at a place called Leadership Institute, which trains conservative activists. So I moved. I never lived further than 15 minutes from my parents in Blackman, and moved 660 miles away to help train conservative activists. And let me tell you, you've got some great conservative activists in the Middle Tennessee area who I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with since I moved up here in 2009.
Interesting. Wow, what a journey. Will you will you come back at some point? I'd love to talk a little bit more about the activism and so forth, because I think that you're right. In Middle Tennessee, we have a lot of great activists and we have a lot of great conservatives. Clearly, Matthew, you're one of them. So this guy that attacked you, what are you thinking when he comes up to you and he starts screaming at you? And I had to put a lot of 1 kilohertz tones in there. So let me tell you, he was, at one point, were you afraid that he was going to actually try to get physical with you?
The video that you see is actually the second encounter. As he approached the polling location, as a poll greeter, what I do is pass out sample ballots, Republican sample ballots. They're clearly labeled, and I'm very friendly and outgoing. So I said, "Sir, would you like a Republican sample ballot?" And he flew off the handle. We had about a 2-minute exchange before he went in to vote. It was at that point that I realized he was probably going to come back out and continue his tirade. So I I have an iPhone, and I dropped it in my shirt pocket and turned the camera on and just waited. So the original video has about 90 seconds of me standing there waiting for him to come out of the polling location. And then, of course, what you see is the exchange. I believe, and I filed a police report, and I'm pursuing charges on the matter, at least for assault. But I believe if the other gentleman in the video, an older gentleman who's bald, said, if he hadn't been in the proximity of the interaction, I feared for my life and thought the gentleman was going to get physical. And that's what I've told the Arlington County Police, who are super professional, and they're handling this in a way that is certainly seeks to get to the bottom of the matter. I'm under the impression, too, Dan, that he's got a long track record of this. According to the sleuths on the internet, I have his name. and he is engaged in this kind of activity with some pretty high-level Republicans, including Donald Rumsfeld, allegedly, in the early 2000s. And he was on the White House lawn in 2018, allegedly, to disrupt an event that President Trump was having on the White House lawn.
Do you find, Matthew, you grew up here in Middle Tennessee. What kind of a culture shock has it been for you going to Virginia, even though you're within a conservative culture, within what you're involved in? But, Virginia, we just know, maybe we'll talk about Virginia a little bit, but, you've got a lot of progressives there. How are you dealing with, or is there any kind of a culture shock?
The exciting part was I moved from Tennessee right after Republicans took the House and the state Senate. I was involved in those election cycles, and it was exciting to see. It's kind of a different world in Tennessee now with supermajorities in both chambers. The Republicans actually aren't especially accountable to anything, but I had pretty direct access to my elected officials. Would go into Nashville, the state capitol, all the time. Was engaged in the first Tea Party protest in February of 2009, right there on Legislative Plaza. But moving to Virginia, and especially Northern Virginia, where every one of my elected officials is a far left progressive, I don't have the same access to my elected officials. I can't ask about processes and things like that, either at the local level or in Richmond. But that said, as chairman of the Arlington County Republican Committee, which is an unpaid job, it's so exciting because there are so many opportunities to reach not only Republicans who didn't know there were other Republicans in the county, I hear that all the time, but also Democrats who were disaffected. Last night at our election night party, a woman came up to me and she said, I was a political appointee in the Bill Clinton administration, and I'm a Republican now. She said, I'm sorry for what I did in my past life, and I'm ready to join your committee. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing these moments, these light bulb moments, especially in a community where an overwhelming majority of the industry, of the economy, is based on the federal workforce. So I'm grateful to be the chairman of this committee of a 20% party. We get 20% of the vote on election day in Arlington in a good year. But I came from Rutherford County, and looking back and looking at Rutherford County now, I see a lot of trends in the next 10 or 12 years, unless the Republican committee in my home county of Rutherford really steps it up. I think that it could slip and be sort of engulfed by the politics of Nashville Metro in the next, decade or so.
Well, that is, of course, always a worry. We saw what happened in Virginia yesterday. I've been covering it. The state legislature fully now in hands of the Democrats. A defeat, I think, for Glenn Youngkin. People are thinking about him running as a alternative to Donald Trump. What are your thoughts ultimately on what happened yesterday? And do you think the Republicans have an opportunity in the next presidential election to retake some of those losses?
So it's disappointing what happened in Virginia, to lose the lower chamber as well. We had all great candidates. And to be honest, we have a great governor. Governor Glenn Youngkin is tireless. He raised millions for our candidates. He invested directly in their races. We had 5 state Senate races that were toss-up. And the party played heavily in all of them. We had a number of state house races, which were toss-up, and the party played heavily in all of them. It's exactly what a state political party and their executive, their governor, should do. And as a unit committee chairman, I'm so grateful for the campaign infrastructure that exists, even in a place like Arlington. We had 2 state Senate candidates in Arlington who were tantamount to, Republicans running in Memphis. And the state party campaign apparatus gave them each $6,000 to get their campaigns off the ground. Absolutely phenomenal help from the state party. But in 2024, look, we have a choice to make. I'm just a unit committee chairman. I don't drive the messaging of the Republican Party, although sometimes I try. And voters have a choice. We've got Joe Biden in the White House. He is woefully unfit for office. Even the Democrats realize that. We've got a third-party candidate who is nipping at the heels, something we haven't seen in a couple of decades. And we've got a Republican Party that is really trying to find itself. And so we have an opportunity here because the Republican Party and the conservative movement is the movement for the American dream. It's the movement for people who want to come to this country. It's the movement for suburban moms. It's the movement for young people who want to make their way in the world. And we have to take that message to anyone and everyone who will listen.
Matthew Hurtt is joining us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Matthew, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 36 now. I ran for a county commission in Rutherford County when I was 19 years old. I tell people I got it out of my system in the 2006 election cycle, and I have been just a passionate conservative activist ever since. I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Bobby Petray and Francis Arthur and some others, Ben Cunningham in the Nashville area, who have just done so much good work building and strengthening the conservative movement in Tennessee. And they, you guys have a different set of challenges. With the Republican supermajorities in both chambers, it's now Republicans that conservatives have to contend with. And so I'm really grateful to be in the company of such awesome conservative activists from Middle Tennessee. And of course, I would not be where I am today without somebody like Phil Valentine, who for such a long time in Nashville was the voice of reason. He was on the front lines against the income tax in the late 90s and early 2000s. And it was right here on this station on Super Talk 99.7.
Let me ask you, and totally agree. And, I could not be prouder of this radio station's heritage and place in Middle Tennessee. Let me ask you, as far as, and last question here, when we talk about Glenn Youngkin, I also, by the way, am a big Glenn Youngkin fan. When it comes to Trump, I mean, from your vantage point in Virginia, there does seem to be, I don't know, is there really a disconnect between like an anti-Trump movement and a pro-Trump movement? It seems to me like with all the polling that by and large, most folks agree that Donald Trump should be the nominee, even if you like Glenn Youngkin.
The polling looks good for Donald Trump. That New York Times Siena poll looks great, and I think it speaks to frustrations with the Democratic Party. I think that we could see that kind of polling with another candidate, but Donald Trump is sort of a once-in-a-generation political figure who has captured the frustration. I don't write off, people who came into this movement from sort of the America First MAGA experience of 2016. I was a delegate to the National Convention as a Republican in 2016 and in 2012, and I'm grateful for the energy and enthusiasm that former President Trump has given to conservatives. It's in the matters of personal. It's the way how thin-skinned he is in this political arena. It's the stuff he's dealing with in the court system. Of course, it could be a witch hunt, but did he do everything legal? And so there's a lot of things dogging him that will only continue to be an issue as we move through the presidential primary. But I do think that he still speaks to a majority of Republican voters in the primary process.
What I think is interesting, Matthew, is you've got Donald Trump, and then you've got the Glenn Youngkins, you've got the Nikki Haley, who she would also beat Joe Biden if the election were held today. You've got Ron DeSantis and so forth. And I said this in my 5 a.m. monologue now, but Donald Trump, there's a personal connection to Donald Trump that a lot of conservatives have because a lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans voted for Donald Trump. Then we sat by and watched, witch hunt after witch hunt and impeachment after impeachment. We watched the laptop from hell story and how the media tried to and did suppress that story. I mean, there's so many reasons why there is an emotional connection to Donald Trump as opposed to just, some of these other Republicans like a Nikki Haley or a Ron DeSantis or a Tim Scott or a Glenn Youngkin, who they're Republicans, but there's just not that personal connection where we all went through the same thing along with Donald Trump because a lot of us lost friends and family because of our Donald Trump support. Do you think that's part of what's going on?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And again, to reiterate what you've said, there is certainly a strong connection. And I think that President Trump speaks to that frustration and certainly, every institution in Washington and across the country was stacked against him and continues to be so. And I think that, the Republican Party, and that isn't a monolithic unit, it is made up of millions of voters, each who have their own cares and fears and frustrations and ideas about which direction this country should go. That's for us to play out in the primary. And I think the Republican Party is the only U.S. political party that can handle such a wide diversity of political thought from somebody from a Donald Trump to a John McCain, to a Nikki Haley, to a Governor Youngkin, to a Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, who I bet wouldn't get 10% of the vote in Tennessee. But we have a political party and a conservative movement that is able to navigate this middle to the right, and it needs to be a governing coalition. So when we have nominees, we've got to come together and support them. I'll say this to the listeners who are wondering how they can get involved. All of you have a local unit committee, the Republican Party of whatever county that you live in, even in Nashville, even in Metro Nashville. Get involved in that. And if, be involved, be engaged, talk to people in your neighborhood. The way that poll greeters, like what I did yesterday, is so successful is because I know a lot of the people in the neighborhood. Is because when they see me, they've seen me at the grocery store. They see me out at the Civic Association meeting, or they see me at the farmer's market. And so it's far more difficult for them to hate me if they know me in person. And so I encourage the listeners to get out, only an hour a week or a couple hours a month to be involved in the civic process.
Matthew, on Twitter, how can people follow you?
Yeah, Twitter or X, whatever they're calling it now, is Matthew Hurtt. It's a total of 4 T's in that name, MattheHurtt. And my phone melted yesterday. The video's got over 10 million views. And it's an honor to be able to come and speak to you, Dan, and your gang of 5 now with me in here, and your listeners, because Middle Tennessee is home to me. It's where I grew up. It's where I cut my teeth. And it still means a lot to me. So the success of conservatives in Middle Tennessee is so important. And so it's just an honor to be on today.
Well, it's an honor to have you. And Matthew, when you next time you're back in Middle Tennessee, would love to have you on in studio for a longer and more in-depth conversation. Matthew Hurtt joining us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Thanks very much for joining us.